Today is May the 24th, 1996, and we're interviewing Kathleen Gould in the Historical Society's video room on Stone Street. Where do you live, Mrs. Gould?
I now live on Oakland Drive, which is south of the city limits, off from 1792.
And how old are you?
I'm 82.
82. And where were you born?
I was born in Ellenville, New York, in the Catskill Mountains. Yes. And I came to DeLand in the fall of 1919 with my parents, Richard and Nellie Simpson, and my sister Marion. My father was a building contractor in Ellenville, New York, and continued his building in DeLand. He owned one of the first automobiles in Ellenville and drove his family to DeLand, taking 11 days to make the trip. The first few years, we lived at the corner of West Wisconsin and Delaware Avenues. The street was paved with pine needles. I entered the first grade the following year, graduated from DeLand High School, and attended Stetson University. I married Vincent W. Gould, Jr., and have 3 sons, Vincent, Robert, and William, 11 grandchildren, and 13 great-grandchildren.
Really a nice family. That sounds good.
Thank you. Vincent died in an auto accident in 1947, and I continued to run the insurance and real estate business since then, and now have a son, a daughter-in-law, and 2 grandsons in the business with me.
It's nice to keep it in the family, isn't it?
My father-in-law, V.W. Gould, came to DeLand in 1885 with his parents, who owned the Putnam Hotel for many years. V.W. founded the V.W. Gould Agency in 1907 and was head of the business until his death in 1945. My husband headed the business from that date until his death. My father-in-law was very civic-minded, held many offices in the town, and wrote many articles on the history of DeLand. Many of his articles were published in the newspapers as early as 1920. The following is one of his articles, in part, concerning the school system. Mr. Gould was elected to the Volusia County Board, School Board, and served for 22 years, with a majority of that time as chairman. In 1869, it was stated that the legislature had passed a law providing for a school system for the state, 2 years after Florida had been admitted to the Union. This law was never operative, however, and was soon repealed, and another one passed. This latter law made no provision for free schools, and no taxation was provided. The schools were supported, for the most part, by the proceeds from the sale of swamp and overflowed lands, which had been ceded to the state by the U.S. government for school purposes, and by private subscriptions in the various communities. State Superintendent Chase found conditions very discouraging for the establishment of a public school system. What funds there had been in the state treasurer for school purposes had been used during the Civil War for the purchase of arms, ammunitions, and other Army purposes. He set himself bravely to the task, however, and the records show that he addressed a questionnaire to the county school superintendents of the state to learn what the local conditions were in the various counties. Volusia County reported a total of youth of school age 4 to 21 of 421. A tax was imposed for school purposes which was expected to yield a total of $500. There were schoolhouses in 10 settlements, and they were mostly log buildings. It was at that time that Volusia County received assistance from the national government for the establishment of a school. The government supplied the material, and the neighbors united in putting it up. After it was erected, one of them took down the building and moved it away. From the second day of March, 1876, we have the record of a school board activity here in the office of the school administration building. In a meeting held May the 1st, 1876, a resolution was passed requesting the county clerk to levy a special tax of 3 mills for school purposes. A little later, we find a table of the tax income for county school work as follows. In 1869, $590. In 1870, $509. 1871, $426. In 1872, $598. 1873, $594, and in 1874, $490, and in 1875, $650.
Very interesting.
But it seems they did not get all of the money that they had levied for the county school purposes. And in a report of the county superintendent filed on January 1877, we note the following comment. It is to be regretted that the school fund heretofore collected had not been held sacred for the purpose for which it was raised, and that a sufficient sum had not been in the treasury to have continued the school system. Beginning in 1876, with a one-room school, which was also used as a church, a teacher who drew a salary of $21 a month.
Oh, so different than from today.
For a 4-month term. It has now grown to such proportions, now this is Mr. Gould speaking, that there are over 1,700 pupils and teaching staff of 70. Including principals. The county superintendent's salary was adjusted, and it was moved and carried that for school activity and for his salary would be $3 per day. And he would be allowed 75 days in which to visit the schools of the county and do the other routine work of the office, providing that he be paid for the time actually employed, and no more. And that no mileage be allowed.
Oh, wow.
And that in addition, he'd be allowed $3 per day while attending the meetings of the board. That there was some liberality upon the part of the board is shown by the next resolution. It was moved and carried that an appropriation of $3.75 be made the purpose of purchasing stationery and stamps for the office of county superintendent. Then also at that time, Bert Fish started teaching, and his salary was $40 a month. It was soon raised to $55, and then he held a position as principal of the DeLand schools at $75 a month. He later became county superintendent.
I didn't realize that. I'm learning.
And then gave up schoolwork for the practice of law. The career of Judge Fish should be an encouragement to those young people who are making a start in life for starting with a $40 a month job. He was reputed to be a millionaire and was one of the county's largest property owners and accumulated wealth by his own efforts right here in Volusia County.
Well, you're certainly telling me things that I did not know. I'm learning today.
Then another article on the first school in DeLand was written by Blanche Farrington. It was a clear day on December the 6th, 1876, when 70 of DeLand's pioneers gathered for the first town meeting in a clearing in the woods at the spot now occupied by Stetson Flower Shop. They set the course for their future with plans for a schoolhouse and a church, the first considerations. Henry DeLand, the town's founder and benefactor, led in suggestions and donations. A former Salapatica manufacturer at Fairport, New York, he had first come to Florida in March of 1876 on a sightseeing tour. He was a guest in a log cabin on 10 acres of land cleared by DeLand's first settler, Captain John Rich, who had arrived in the spring of 1875 to take up a homestead, plant a grove, and farm. The baking powder magnate was so impressed that he later said, "From the first, I had a fixed purpose to give all the money I could make to the schools and churches and to keep only the amount I had made before I ever saw Florida." At the town meeting, it was decided that the schoolhouse should be built first, to be used also as a place for divine worship and a Sabbath school until a church could be built. In keeping with his purpose, DeLand donated the amount of land needed from a part of his homestead on which they were holding the meeting. He has estimated the cost of the building would be $800 to $1,000 and promised that if it were completed within 90 days, he would give $400 toward the erection or a proportionate part of what was needed. He also pledged $400 to any denomination that would build a church or for a union church. At the suggestion of Henry B. Austin, the town's second settler, the community was named DeLand, a perpetuation of its founder. The streets got their names next. The section line immediately south of the schoolhouse was to be known as New York Avenue. The easterly line of Henry DeLand's homestead was called Amelia, after the wife of the town's first minister, the Reverend M.S. Leet, a Methodist. The line of dividing homesteads owned by DeLand and Captain Rich on the west was called Clara Avenue, after the captain's wife. The east line of Section 9 was called Kentucky Avenue. The north section line was named Plymouth Avenue. The street 20 rods from and running parallel to New York became Indiana Avenue, and the avenue 40 rods from and running parallel to New York Avenue was called Rich Avenue in honor of the first settler. DeLand made an additional promise that day to open up a boulevard from New York Avenue up to and beyond the schoolhouse, some 400 rods, and with a row of trees planted in the middle along its whole length, to be known as Woodland Boulevard. Plans also were made to build a good wharf at Lake Beersford at an estimated cost of $300, with DeLand offering to make up any lack of funds. The little wooden schoolhouse was built, and the school was called to order May the 7th, 1877, by Miss Rowena Dean of New York, its first teacher. It was the first public building in DeLand. And then I thought you might like to hear about the big fire that happened in DeLand. And this is also by Mr. Gould. About midnight of the last day of September 1886, there was an alarm of fire in the business section. There are no fire alarm sirens, and so there was not even a bell. The alarm was broadcast by shouting and the firing of revolvers. The fire had started in a saloon on the east side of the boulevard, our main street, about midway between New York and Indiana Avenues. Our business section at that time consisted of a row of wooden buildings on either side of the boulevard, mostly between New York and Indiana Avenue, with a few business houses north and south of those streets. With one exception, we had no firefighting apparatus at that time, no fire department, or even a water plant. Bucket lines were formed for nearby wells, and buckets of water were passed from hand to hand. Every able-bodied citizen was a volunteer fireman that night, both white and colored. Mr. Gould was 14 years old when he arrived in DeLand, so I figure at this time he was 15. While flames and smoke were rolling mountain high, a seething mass, a little man with a 3-gallon fire extinguisher strapped to his back appeared upon the scene, seeking a proper vantage point for attack. His was the only modern firefighting equipment on the job. It was a picture of woeful inadequacy in the face of stupendous need. As it was impossible to put the fire out, efforts were concentrated on preventing the spread in adjoining blocks. This was accomplished by tireless efforts upon the part of the workers. In the morning, the entire block on either side of the street was just smoking embers, and the business houses in the main business section had disappeared. Such was the spirit of our citizens, however, that there was no discouragement. The fire had been a lesson. We had a population of probably 1,500 people at the time. We were becoming a city, and public improvements were demanded. The city council held a special meeting and passed a brick ordinance which required that nothing but brick should be used in construction within certain prescribed limits. A deep well was drilled, and a water works plant was established. A fire department was organized, and apparatus secured. Some brick buildings were erected where formerly there had been wooden ones, and DeLand had changed from a struggling village to a city. Judged by present standards, the new volunteer fire department would not rate high in efficiency. But with a decorative standpoint, no department anywhere would rank higher. The first official action of the organization was to order uniforms for the membership. And on every occasion when a parade was justified, the fire department was a real feature. Especially upon the 4th of July did the membership shine forth. And new red suits trimmed with gold braid and topped with shining black helmets, they rode down the street mounted on hook and ladder truck in all their splendor. Fortunately, there were not many fires at that time, for the service was not as dependable as the organization was spectacular. The apparatus was horse-drawn. So hose cart and hook and ladder truck were kept in a building near a livery stable so that their horses would be available when needed. When an alarm of fire was sounded and the volunteer firemen came together, the first concern was to secure horses and to hitch them to the apparatus. As the horses were sometimes out on the horse lot and had to be captured, there was frequently some delay. Then, when secured and harnessed, swing to the general excitement, they would sometimes balk, all of which hampered the department in the important task of putting out fires. I remember that the efficiency of the hose company was considerably reduced at a rather important daylight fire when one of its best firefighting members suddenly remembered that he had forgotten his helmet and ran back home for it, a distance of several blocks, while the fire raged on. Then the other first in this area was the big freeze.
We go from one extreme to the other.
One
right?
big, yes. Back in the 90s, the growing and marketing of citrus fruit was our one important industry. Nearly everyone in the community was dependent, either directly or indirectly, on the business. Orange growing had proven profitable, and hundreds of acres of land were cleared and planted in groves. Founder DeLand himself, an orange grower, sold grove properties. And in his capacity of developer and real estate operator, such was his faith in the business that he would sell bearing groves to non-residents and new settlers with his personal guarantee that they would return a net profit of 10% per annum. It was easy to sell groves. The return was such a guarantee, and the whole result was that he sold a great many. For several years, they earned not only 10%, but in many cases as much as 20 or 25%. Then in the last of December 1894, a freeze came down from the northwest, the thermometer going down below 20 degrees, which froze the fruit and the tree on the trees and damaged the trees so that all the foliage fell off and all tender growth was killed. While the loss of a crop was serious, there had been freezes before which resulted in the fruit being frozen and the loss of the foliage So the growers trimmed up their trees and patiently began to wait for another crop. Then came a spell of warm weather with rains. The trees were filled with sap in preparation for putting out a new growth of foliage. Then, in the middle of February, while the trees were in that condition, there came another freeze, even more severe than the first one. Henry A. DeLand, who had many thousands of dollars of guarantees out on groves that he had sold, bravely made his guarantee good, but it wiped him out financially, and he was obliged to return north to re-engage in the business of manufacturing. So far reaching were the effects of the calamity that it is impossible to describe it. Groves that had been worth $1,000 or more an acre had no value, and many of them were abandoned. Many growers left Florida while others went to work at anything they could find to do. And what did the people of DeLand do? They bravely went to work, determined to forge ahead on the face of the most discouraging conditions. While other towns had thrown up the sponge, the DeLand City Council arranged to borrow $25,000, a large sum in those days, for public improvements. Shell was hauled from DeLand Springs, and our principal streets were shell surfaced. Not an ideal paving, but inexpensive and a vast improvement over sand roads and sawdust surfacing. This not only gave the city a much-needed improvement, but it furnished labor to men who needed it badly, and it put new life into the community. The citrus industry, while some growers gave, the other far-seeing businessmen saw an opportunity. They realized that the dual freezes with warm weather between was indeed unusual. It was something that had never happened before, and it was not likely to happen again. The freeze, too, taught them the importance of location in selecting land for groves. So while the freeze of 1895 was for some the end, for others it was the beginning of a new era in the growing of citrus fruit. Jim Perkins, the Honorable J.W., who had been frozen out with the rest, made a new start in the hammock land in the lake section north of DeLand. He had over 200 acres of bearing grove. Birdfish, also an honorable, and our minister to Egypt, had over 200 acres. Theodore Strawn, who came from Illinois, saw the possibility in property locating groves, got actively into the business, and the Strawn Corporation had over 400 acres of groves. John B. Stetson, the wealthy hat manufacturer, was not discouraged, and the Stetson estate had over 200 acres in groves.
Well, it's interesting to see that about 90 years later, the freeze repeated itself. It's very
Yes.
interesting. It really is.
Yes. In fact, Mr. Gould wrote some of this after 60 years. And, of course, he was not here when this other bad freeze.
Right.
Yeah. And then the next article that Mr. Gould wrote was about our streets and how important they were. The first 10 years of DeLand's history might be known as the era of sand streets. Street improvements were not in vogue in those days except in the large towns, and as DeLand was but a small village, we managed to get along after a fashion with sandy thoroughfares. There came a time time, however, when civic pride began to develop and something better was demanded. It was in 1887 that this sentiment developed into concrete form. The leaders of public thought got together to devise ways and means. The city government began to function, and a plan was worked out to provide our growing little city with its first street improvement program. $200 was appropriated. A mule was purchased, also a wagon with high sides and tailboard. Henry Dixon, one of our pioneer colored citizens, was employed to take charge of the outfit, and the real work of improvement began. Dunn's sawmill, in what was known as Dunn's Bottom, furnished the raw material. Dixon and his mule hauled load after load of sawdust from the mill to the streets in our business section, which was then quite limited. Even this modest program had its opposition. Groups of our more conservative citizens formed into huddles on the street corners and protested against the tendency of the times towards extravagance and the action of the city officials in taking such unwarranted liberties with the public money. Some of the merchants in the north end of the business section, who were prone to pitch horseshoes during the quiet hours of the afternoon, feared that the sawdust paving would not equal sand for their horseshoe courts. It was soon learned that pine needles made a very good road where the traffic was not heavy. A good heavy cover of pine needles, or pine straw as it was called, put on in the fall would last through the year. It only cost $50 a mile to lay. Made a soft roadbed with a pleasant odor when the sun shone upon it. Then followed the shell era. It was discovered that the deposits of marine shells, which nature has so generously provided in this part of the state, and the shell mounds left to us by the Indians, offered an excellent road material. A shell mound was opened up near DeLand Springs, and later the city obtained a shell property near town. After the big freeze, when things were at a low ebb, we sold bonds for public improvements, and the principal streets of the town were paved with shell. Our shell-paved streets were our pride and gave us a reputation around the state of being a live, progressive town. They were forging ahead while other Florida towns were still dormant as a result of the freeze. While shell made a very good roadway when kept in repair, when automobiles and trucks came into general use, it did not stand up under the traffic on the main streets. It was then that we formed a road district and bonded for brick roads. We built highways of brick in every direction, to Lake Helen, to the river, toward Orange City, and toward Daytona. These brick highways have given us faithful service and are still in use, but have been widened by the addition of cement shoulders. And I remember traveling from DeLand to Daytona, and prior to the cement shoulders, you had to get off from the brick. Your car went down into sand, and then you had to bump back up on the brick. But then they did eventually add the cement shoulders, so it was room for two cars to meet.
Such a difference now.
Unbelievable.
It is.
The most recent improvement of our streets was when we again bonded for public improvements with a large appropriation for streets, and paved nearly all of the streets of the city with concrete. Very few towns the size of DeLand have as much street paving as we had, and our well-paved and beautifully shaded avenues are the outstanding attraction of our city.
Well, it is a beautiful city, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And one of the reasons it is was because of the oak trees. And Mr. Gould also wrote about the oak trees. Strangers invariably remark upon DeLand's beautiful shade trees. Our oak trees are undoubtedly the most outstanding of the city's various attractions. Newcomers are moved to wonder that while other Florida towns have a few streets with shade trees, here in DeLand we find them not only on every highway but on every byway as well. Every street within the city limits, with the exception of the business section, where it was found necessary to remove them as the busy section became increasingly busy, is lined on either side with beautiful, wide-spreading water oaks. They are not only attractive to the eye, but they furnish a grateful shade over streets and sidewalks when the sunshine is warm, providing us with a comfort we could not otherwise enjoy. Our oaks are our greatest asset. I wish that I might be able to report that it was an artistic urge that prompted the planting of these trees in the early days of our history, or an altruistic desire upon the part of our pioneers to supply beauty and comfort for future generations. I have to admit, however, that the actuating motive was, on the part of those who planted the trees, largely a business proposition. A real credit for the plan, which has resulted in this civic attraction, belongs to a far-seeing city council that served the community probably as far back as 1880. The city was served at that time by a group of pioneers with a vision. An ordinance was passed to the effect that every property owner who planted oak trees along his street frontage and maintained them successfully for 2 years would be allowed 50 cents per tree, said amount to be deducted from their city taxes. As oak trees were plentiful and labor cheap in those days, the trees could be planted for even less than that amount, so that property owners were offered an opportunity to beautify their property and to contribute toward a civic improvement and make a profit as well. The result was that everyone who had street frontage within the city limits, no matter how remote or how little the street was used, might be engaged in the general movement of tree planting. In their enthusiasm, they planted the trees, in many cases only 15 to 25 feet apart, when it might have been better for the trees had they been planted 40 to 50 feet apart. However, DeLand got her shade trees, and that was the important thing. At the end of the 2-year period, the city government found itself in the embarrassing position of having a town full of young shade trees and no money in the treasury. It is true, not much money was required in those days, but there were no bonds to pay interest upon, no improved streets to maintain, no fire department, and mayors and city councilmen had not conceived the idea of drawing salaries. So the main item of municipal expense was the police department. The police department at that time consisted of a town marshal who did both day and night duty and who drew them then $50 a month. Food and clothing were essential to the well-being and efficiency of the marshal. he should not be expected to leave his family out to browse upon the oak trees. And DeLand was faced with its first financial crisis. A special meeting of the council was called, and the oak tree ordinance was repealed. But the work had been accomplished. From the marshal's point of view, the damage had been done. From the point of view of the citizens and of succeeding generations, a wonderful civic improvement had been inaugurated. The city had planted a row of trees in the middle of the boulevard for its entire length, also on some of the cross streets, those on Howery still remaining. Orange trees were alternated with oaks at the beginning, but it was soon found to be impractical to grow orange trees in the streets, and they were taken out. One of the fiercest civic storms in our history was raised when it was found advisable, on account of increasing traffic and the growing use of the automobile, to remove the shade trees from the business section and from the middle of the boulevard. There were long letters in the local papers and heated conversations on the streets, but the trees were removed to make way for business progress. When we view our wonderful system of shade trees, not equaled in any other town that we know of, when we consider its value to the city and how little it really cost, we come to the inevitable conclusion that our shade trees have been DeLand's best investment.
Certainly has.
Yeah. And then another article by Mr. Gould, which was on early railroading, is very interesting. And if you'd like...
Yes, I would like to.
Oh, great. All
I'd like
right.
to have this all together because it's very interesting. And
All right. Transportation in the early days was by boat and stagecoach. Passengers and mail were brought to DeLand Landing on a 17-hour schedule from Jacksonville, and from thence into town on a bus line run by Charles Miller. Passengers for Daytona were taken to Enterprise, now Benson Springs, now again Enterprise,
right.
and then to Daytona by stagecoach. Some went from Jacksonville to Daytona by schooner, but it was probably about 1882 that E.W. Bond, founder of the Bond Lumber Company and one of our earliest developers, built a railroad connecting DeLand with DeLand Landing. It was a narrow gauge road, the DeLand terminal being located on West New York Avenue, and the river terminal was situated near the site of Bott's Fernery, a total distance of about 5 miles. The rolling stock consisted of a small wood-burning locomotive, a passenger car, a baggage car, and a boxcar for freight. The train met the early morning boat from Jacksonville, bringing the passengers, baggage, express mail, freight, and whatnot at a leisurely rate of speed, and the train crew were most accommodating, for if a passenger wished to get off between stations, they would stop the train. This miniature railroad served the community and enjoyed a fair prosperity until about 1886, when D.B. Parse, one of our early winter visitors from New York State, was walking across the wharf and he stepped into a hole in the planking and injured an ankle. When he arrived in town, he purchased a pair of crutches and started a damage suit against the owner of the railroad. Mr. Bond did not take the suit seriously at first, but Parse won in the lower court, and when the case was taken to the Supreme Court, the decision of the lower court was sustained. I do not know what the amount of the damages were, but D.B. Parse got the railroad, a sawmill, and an orange grove thrown in. About that time, the Jacksonville, Tampa, and Key West Railroad was constructed through here. An effort was made to have the road come through town, but they demanded such a large bonus that our young community did not feel that they could pay such a price. As a matter of fact, our people thought they would build through DeLand anyway. As it turned out, however, they followed the flat woods, where the grade was easy rather than come through our Pine Hill country. So we are not on the main line, but near to it. The JT and KW absorbed the river road and discontinued its use, constructing a broad gauge road from DeLand Junction into DeLand. Beersford was the junction point for a short time, the river boats changing their landing place to the Beersford dock, and the DeLand depot was located on Amelia Avenue, near New York Avenue. Passenger service from the junction into DeLand was discontinued, as with the use of automobiles, transportation was found to be more convenient to take a taxi cab into town than to change cars to be brought into the depot. It was about 1885 that Mr. Twing promoted the Atlantic and Western, first known as the Blue Springs, Orange City, and Atlantic, from New Smyrna through Lake Helen and Orange City to Blue Springs Landing at the river. His plan included a road from Lake Helen through DeLand to a junction with the JT and KW at Highland Park, between DeLand Junction and Glenwood, where there was then a flourishing village. The road was constructed between Lake Helen and DeLand, but the money gave out before the track was laid. The old road bed is used as a country road. The old A&W is now a part of the Florida East Coast system, with the western terminal at Orange City. R.B. Plant, another capitalist, acquired the JT and KW, and it became known as the Plant system. There was great rivalry between Flagler on the East Coast and Plant on the West Coast, each having their railroads, their hotels, and other developments. Our train service has constantly improved on the main line, now part of the Atlantic coastline, among the leading systems in the country, and about 15 years ago, a fast winter train was put on known as the Tampa Special. This train only stopped at the large towns, and DeLand was not considered enough importance at that time to warrant a stop. So the trains went whizzing by our station at about 60 miles an hour. City government and Chamber of Commerce made earnest protests to the railroad officials, but it was to a cow that we were indebted to the first stop at a Tampa Special train at our station. As the northbound special was racing up the line one day, the cow, deliberately, nonchalantly, and utterly indifferent to the urgency of the fast train schedule, started to cross the track. The locomotive struck the cow in the sirloin region and threw it ahead of the train about 50 feet, where it struck a switch lever, closing the switch, which threw the train onto a siding and turned locomotive and the cars over in the ditch, a mangled, tangled mass. There was one death and many were injured. Soon after that, DeLand was made a regular stopping point for the Tampa Special. And now we have excellent train service, which is quite in contrast to the service offered travelers in the early 80s.
Well, hey, these have been wonderful memories, and I just appreciate Mr. Gould and Mrs. Farrington and all those that have contributed to this. And
Well, it's Mr. Gould was a writer, I would say, was a hobby. And he apparently was so interested in what was happening in Florida. In fact, he was also written up as one of the founders of Florida in the Miami paper. And so he wrote so many of the
well, he certainly
articles.
has contributed a lot.
Yes.
Also, thinking of you, you've been a very active person here in DeLand for many years, and you're active in your church. Is that Presbyterian?
First Presbyterian.
First Presbyterian Church. And also, you're very active in the Pilot Club and other
Have been. Yes, have been.
clubs and sororities. And which one is very special and dear to you? Do you have any special sorority or special club that's been very dear to you over the years? Or
Well, actually, when I took over, after my husband's death in 1947, the agency, I became, of course, very active in insurance and real estate. And eventually, it seemed to shift to the real estate, so that I became state president. And I held the office of governor, which was an office in the real estate profession, Florida Association of Realtors, and then became a regional vice president. So I became a national officer from that time, so that I traveled a great deal
yes.
in the real estate, national and state. And I was president of the local board also at that time.
Right. Any special honors over the years?
Oh, I feel that I have received many honors. In the Presbyterian Church, I was elected an elder in 1966.
Very nice.
And in 1981, I became the moderator of our presbytery, which was the top honor at that time. Well, it still is, as far as that's concerned.
Very outstanding honor, very nice honor. How many years were you and your husband married?
15.
15 years. I remember so well that morning.
Do you?
I do. It's on
Yes.
Easter morning. I
Yes,
always
it was
remember
Easter
that
morning.
He passed away
Yes.
in the car accident.
Uh-huh.
Did you ever think about leaving DeLand or?
Not really. I have
This was home,
traveled
wasn't
a
it?
great deal. I have traveled abroad a great deal, and of course all over the United States. But I still have never said I want to move there.
And reared a beautiful family. You certainly have a nice family.
Well, I'm
And
very proud
they've
of
done
that.
lots of good things
Very
too.
proud of that.
They've
Yes,
done
they
lots.
have. Yes, they certainly have.
In closing, would you like to tell just what DeLand means to you, or?
Well, as I have said, I have never seen in my travels a place that I would care to move to. And another thing that I remember about my father-in-law, V.W. Gould, you really should never say anything against DeLand as far as he was concerned.
He loved it too, didn't he?
Oh, yes, he truly loved it. So DeLand, the Athens of Florida, continued to grow from the seed planted by the founders, and it continues to live by the motto on the city seal: faith, hope, and charity.
Beautiful. Well, I'm Betty Van Allen, and I appreciate the leadership and the contributions you've done and given to DeLand, and also I appreciate your family. And thank you, Mrs. Gould.
You are so welcome.